Chapter 3, Part 1. The seasons long for each other, like men and women, in order that they may be cured of their excesses. Spring, if it lingers for more than a week beyond its span, starts to hunger for summer to end the days of perpetual promise. Summer, in its turn, soon begins to sweat for something to quench its heat, and the mellowest of autumns will tire of gentility at last, and ache for a quick, sharp frost to kill its fruitfulness. Even winter, the hardest season, the most implacable, dreams, as February creeps on, of the flame that will presently melt it away. Everything tires with time, and starts to seek some opposition to save it from itself. So August gave way to September, and there were few complaints. Chapter 3, Part 2. With work, the house on Lodovico Street began to look more hospitable. There were even visits from neighbours who, after sizing up the couple, spoke freely of how happy they were to have number 55 occupied again. Only one of them made any mention of Frank, referring in passing to the odd fellow who'd lived in the house for a few weeks the previous summer. There was a moment of embarrassment when Rory revealed the tenant to have been his brother, but it was soon glossed over by Julia, whose power to charm knew no bounds. Rory had seldom made mention of Frank during the years of his marriage to Julia, though he and his brother were only 18 months apart in age, and as children had been inseparable. This Julia had learned on an occasion of drunken reminiscing, a month or two before the wedding, when Rory had spoken at length about Frank. It had been melancholy talk. The brothers' paths had diverged considerably when they'd passed through adolescence, and Rory regretted it. Regretted still more the pain Frank's wild lifestyle had brought to their parents. It seemed that when Frank appeared, once in a blue moon from whichever corner of the globe he was presently laying waste, he only brought grief. In his tales of adventures in the shallows of criminality, his talk of whores and petty theft, all appalled the family. But there had been worse, or so Rory had said. In his wilder moments, Frank had talked of life lived in delirium, of an appetite for experience that conceded no moral imperative. Was it the tone of Rory's telling, a mixture of revulsion and envy, that had so piqued Julia's curiosity? Whatever the reason, she had been quickly seized by an unquenchable curiosity concerning this madman. Then, barely a fortnight before the wedding, the black sheep had appeared in the flesh. Things had gone well for him of late. He was wearing gold rings on his fingers, and his skin was tight and tanned. There was little outward sign of the monster Rory had described. Brother Frank was as smooth as a polished stone. She had succumbed to his charm within hours. A strange time ensued. As the days crept towards the date of the wedding, she found herself thinking less and less of her husband-to-be, and more of his brother. They were not wholly dissimilar. A certain lilt in their voices and their easy manner marked them as siblings. But to Rory's qualities, Frank brought something his brother would never have: a beautiful desperation. Perhaps what had happened next had been inevitable. and no matter how hard she'd fought her instinct, she would only have postponed the consummation of their feelings for each other. At least, that was how she tried to excuse herself later. But when all the self-recrimination was done with, she still treasured the memory of their first and last encounter. Kirsty had been at the house, hadn't she, on some matrimonial business, when Frank had arrived. But by that telepathy which comes with desire and fades with it, Julia had known today was the day. She'd left Kirsty to her list-making or such like, and taken Frank upstairs on the pretext of showing him the wedding dress. That was how she remembered it, that he'd asked to see the dress, and that she'd put the veil on, laughing to think of herself in white. And then he'd been at her shoulder, lifting the veil, and she'd laughed on, laughed and laughed, as though to test the strength of his purpose. He had not been cooled by her mirth, however, nor had he wasted time with the niceties of a seduction. The smooth exterior gave way to cruder stuff almost immediately. Their coupling had, in every regard but the matter of her acquiescence, all the aggression and joylessness of rape. Memory sweetened events, of course, and in the 4 years and 5 months since that afternoon she'd replayed the scene often. Now, in remembering it, the bruises were trophies of their passion, her tears proof positive of her feelings for him. The day following he'd disappeared, flitted off to Bangkok or Easter Island, some place where he had no debts to answer. She'd mourned him, couldn't help it. Nor had her mourning gone unnoticed. Though it was never explicitly discussed, she had often wondered if the subsequent deterioration of her relationship with Rory had not started there, with her thinking of Frank as she made love to his brother. And now, despite the change of domestic interiors and the chance of a fresh start together, it seemed that events conspired to remind her again of Frank. It wasn't just the gossip of the neighbours that brought him to mind. One day, when she was alone in the house and unpacking various personal belongings, she came across several wallets of Rory's photographs. Many were relatively recent pictures of the two of them together in Athens and Malta. But buried amongst the transparent smiles were some pictures she couldn't remember ever having seen before. Had Rory kept them from her? Family portraits that went back decades. A photograph of his parents on their wedding day. The black and white image eroded over the years to a series of greys. Pictures of christenings in which proud godparents cradled babies smothered in the family lace. And then photographs of the brothers together, as toddlers with wide eyes, as surly school children snapped at gymnastic displays and in school pageants. Then, as the shyness of acne-ridden adolescence took over, the number of pictures dwindled until the frogs emerged as princes on the other side of puberty. Seeing Frank in brilliant colour clowning for the camera, she felt herself blushing. He had been an exhibitionist youth, predictably enough, always dressed à la mode. Rory, by comparison, looked dowdy. It seemed to her that the brothers' future lives were sketched in these early portraits. Frank, the smiling, seductive chameleon. Rory, the solid citizen. She had packed the pictures away at last, and found, when she stood up, that with the blushes had come tears. Not of regret, she had no use for that. It was fury which made her eyes sting. Somehow, between one breath and the next, she'd lost herself. She knew, too, with perfect certainty, when her grip had first faltered, lying on a bed of wedding lace, while Frank beset her neck with kisses.